Greetings, and welcome to the Drowsy Science Facts. We'll delve into the lovely and sometimes disregarded realm of flowers tonight. Though their true story goes far beyond appearance, they are admired for their beauty and fragrance. Each bloom is the product of evolution over thousands of years. Often, what appears fragile conceals extraordinary strength. What seems straightforward is actually based on an intelligence that enables flowers to sense their environment and change in ways you would never think possible. Insect behavior can be influenced by the flower. It has the ability to change its chemistry to defend itself or to welcome a partner at the ideal time. It has remarkable accuracy in temperature control, air movement management, and light adaptation. Even though these skills are hidden, they have a profound impact on the world. I encourage you to like, subscribe, or leave a comment below if you appreciate these peaceful excursions. One drowsy soul at a time, it guides others to this place as well. But you just need to sleep for the time being. Allow your mind to calm and your body to soften, and let the beauty of nature lull you to sleep. Now let's get started. Some flowers are able to detect the buzz. Some flowers have petals that function almost like tiny acoustic dishes. A bee's wings vibrate as it approaches, sending ripples through the flower that make the petals tremble at the precise moment. That shuddering isn't motionless. When a pollinator is close by, the plant can react in a matter of minutes by slightly raising the amount of sugar in its nectar, which makes the reward richer. The flower does not need ears or a brain. Its tissues are sensitive enough to detect certain air vibrations and can discriminate between the random rustle of the wind and the low hum of a bee. The plant benefits from this sensitivity. It can provide the greatest reward when it is most likely to be gathered and carried away, rather than continuously expending energy on sweet nectar. Only after infrequent rains do some desert flowers bloom. Flowers follow a completely different calendar in some of the driest environments on the planet, buried in hot, silent soil that might not receive any real rain for years. Their seeds wait. Instead of trying to grow in harsh drought, the seeds lie dormant, packed with the information they need, but patiently inactive. Finally, a rare storm brings with it enough moisture to cause a series of chemical reactions. Conditions have changed from lethal to hardly feasible, according to signals within the seed. In large areas, germination starts all at once. Fields that appeared barren suddenly burst into color, stems rise, and thuds form. In a brief period of time, each plant races through its full life cycle in an effort to produce new seeds before the land dries out once more. After that, the flowers disappear, leaving a new generation buried beneath the sand and waiting for the next unlikely downpour. Certain alpine flowers produce heat on their own. Delicate tissues struggle to survive high in the mountains due to the thin atmosphere and cold air. However, some flowers have discovered an unexpected fix. Each flower becomes a tiny pocket of warmth thanks to the ability of their central structures to raise their temperature above the ambient air. From a distance, this heat is insufficient. But for an insect landing on the bloom, it can mean the difference between comfortable activity and sluggish movement. The warmer interior also helps pollen develop properly in an environment where frost can strike even in bright sunshine. The plant increases its metabolic activity in particular tissues to produce this warmth by burning stored energy quickly than usual. As a result, overlapping petals create a soft micro. In addition to protecting its own reproductive cells, this tactic aids the flower in luring cold-stressed petals, a quiet thermal engineering project in the snow. Some flowers signal pollinators by changing color. Some flowers don't have a set color. It is a living message that changes over time. When a flower first opens, its petals may present a bright, inviting shade that stands out clearly against leaves and soil. This stage is frequently associated with an abundance of fresh pollen and nectar. Something significant changes after enough pollinator visits. The pigments in the petals change, giving the blossom a more subdued or completely different hue. It may just appear older to us. A bee or butterfly that has figured out which colors yield the greatest rewards will know it's time to move on and look for younger blooms. Both parties benefit from this color shift. Pollinators conserve energy and time. The plant reduces unnecessary damage to pollen and petals once reproduction is already underway. Through chemistry, the bloom updates its status and becomes its own signpost. UV patterns serve as covert guides for certain flowers. A garden's story cannot be fully conveyed by human eyes. Many petals carry markings that are invisible to us, but blaze like landing lights in ultraviolet. These wavelengths are easily visible to pollinators, like bees. Therefore, something that appears to us as a straightforward yellow or white flower may appear to them as a highly patented target. The UV markings frequently take the shape of rings, stripes, or arrows pointing directly towards the blossom's center, which is where pollen and nectar are kept. The effectiveness of every visit is improved by this guidance system. Insects don't have to look everywhere. They immediately recognize the pattern and follow the best course. In addition, the plant makes it more likely that pollen will come into contact with the appropriate areas of the insect's body. As a result, a silent visual dialogue takes place in a spectrum that people hardly ever notice. To the dragonflies, there are flowers that smell like rotting meat layered on top of well-known hues. Not all flowers strive for sweetness. Some plants use a completely different tactic, depending on creatures attracted to decay rather than scent. Complex chemical blends that closely resemble the smell of a sun-cured carcass are released by their flowers. It is even possible for the petals to acquire mottled colors and textures that resemble flesh in an unsettling way. To a fly or beetle that specializes in finding dead animals, this combination is irresistible. The insect lands expecting food or a place to lay eggs, and instead finds chambers lined with pollen and sometimes temporary traps that keep it inside for a while. Pollen grains adhere to its body in precisely the right places as it tries to flee. The trick goes on when it eventually departs and goes to see another blossom that is similar. In the world of plants, what we find repulsive is just another type of precise attraction. In order to fool males into pollinating them, some orchids imitate female insects. Among the most elaborate floral illusions are orchids that shape their petals and scents to resemble the bodies and mating signals of female insects. To a male bee wasp, the resemblance is close enough that it attempts courtship or even tries to mate with the flower itself. The insect presses against certain structures during this unintentional encounter, attaching pollen packets to its body. In addition to releasing chemical signals that imitate a possible partner's scent, the orchid frequently mimics the texture and minute hair patterns of its target species. The bewildered insect unintentionally spreads the pollen to the precise spot when it flies away and does the same thing on another orchid blossom of the same species. Without providing nectar, the plant receives consistent pollination. All the insect gains is a strangely convincing illusion. Certain flowers are remarkably accurate at counting the hours of daylight. Clocks are not necessary for plants to keep track of time. Furthermore, certain flowers use this internal sense to precisely determine when to open and close. A biological rhythm that reacts to light and dark is formed by networks of genes and proteins deep within their cells. The plant detects slight variations in daylight duration as the season changes. Only when the day has gotten long enough or short enough to fit their preferred window will sudden flowers begin to form buds. Others, even in cloudy skies, open their petals at a certain hour. This timing is not arbitrary. It frequently aligns with times when conditions are safest or with the daily routines of their primary. These plants silently keep time through chemistry by coordinating their reproductive events with the broader rhythms of their environment and minimizing wasted effort by tying flowering to exact measurements of day length. To ensure pollination, some flowers temporarily trap insects. A brief visit is insufficient for certain plants. In order to ensure that pollen transfer actually occurs, their blossoms are designed to act as temporary holding chambers, gently holding certain insects for a sufficient amount of time. After being drawn in by color or scent, a fly or beetle finds that the exit routes have closed or narrowed. It is challenging to escape from slippery surfaces, inward-pointing hairs, or shifting petal positions. Reproductive structures are arranged along the walls of this chamber so that they will come into contact with the visitor as it struggles and crawls. Parts of the flower relax or change shape after a certain amount of time, usually after the stigmas have become receptive or the pollen has matured, allowing the insect to depart. The cycle repeats when it enters another bloom of the same species. The insect is momentarily inconvenienced. The likelihood that the pollen will be delivered precisely increases significantly for the plant. Pollen is released by some flowers in tiny, explosive bursts. Not every pollen floats on the wind, like a drawn bow ready to break. Some blossoms hold their grains under tension. The structure abruptly releases when the proper trigger, typically a particular vibration or a touch from a visiting insect. With far more force than a passive release could accomplish, pollen shoots out in a brief cloud, showering the pollinator or dispersing into the surrounding air. Certain species have specialized anthers that coil or twist as they dry, and then spring open under the correct circumstances. With this technique, the plant can precisely regulate when pollen is released. It delivers grain in concentrated bursts that correspond with actual visits, as opposed to losing it gradually to wind and sporadic bumps. The end effect is a method that transforms a silent flower into a small, precisely targeted launcher by utilizing mechanical energy that has been stored. Certain water flowers have the ability to heat themselves like tiny furnaces. A few aquatic plants create gentle heat inside their blossoms, even while floating in cold water. Their flowers contain active tissues that increase metabolic reactions in a focused area, releasing warmth that rises just enough to change the tiny environment around the bloom. This warmth helps spread scent more effectively across still ponds and marshes because warmer air currents lift fragrances that would otherwise linger close to the surface. It also encourages pollinators that might be sluggish in cool conditions to land and move more actively inside the flower. The temperature difference can be subtle, yet it is strong enough to influence the behavior of insects and the development of pollen. By generating a stable pocket of warmth, these plants create a controlled space in an unpredictable habitat. It is a quiet example of biological engineering that allows a delicate flower to succeed in a place where cold water can restrict almost every other process. A few flowers communicate with each other through airborne chemicals. Some plants send messages into the air when they open, close, or encounter stress. These messages are made of drifting molecules that nearby flowers of the same species can detect. When one plant experiences a shift in conditions, such as sudden shade or a surge in humidity, it may release a faint chemical signal carried by the breeze. Before the circumstances directly affect them, nearby flowers react by modifying their own timing or fragrance output. Despite not being able to be heard or spoken, this communication enables dispersed people to act in concert. They decrease waste and increase the likelihood that pollinators will arrive when nectar is at its peak by exchanging information over short distances. This quiet chemical dialogue turns a cluster of flowers into a network that adapts collectively, showing how even rooted plants can exchange information in surprisingly responsive ways. Some flowers bloom only at night and rely on moonlit pollen. There are some flowers that close tightly during the day and only open at dusk. Their pale petals reflect the faint light of the moon, making them more visible to moths and other night-active creatures. Instead of producing bright daytime colors, these flowers rely on strong drifting scents that travel far through cool air. Their nectar often becomes more concentrated after sunset, offering a rich reward to the few visitors that navigate by touch, smell, and dim reflections. The timing is incredibly precise. In order to shield sensitive tissues from the heat of the day and save energy for the hours when their preferred pollinators are active, many open soon after dusk and close again before dawn. They can flourish in settings full of daytime rivals because of their nocturnal rhythm. They carve out a unique ecological space by working with the stillness and calm of the night rather than the brightness of the sun. There are flowers that move in subtle ways to touch their pollen. Some blossoms do not simply wait for contact. Their internal structures shift when triggered by a visiting insect, bending or tilting in controlled motions that ensure pollen sticks to exactly the right place. These movements are small enough to escape casual notice, but they happen quickly once the flower detects pressure or vibration. A stamen might swing inward. The petal may press gently against a visitor's body. A hidden lever-like structure can release tension that changes the shape of the bloom. This mechanical response improves the accuracy of pollen transfer and reduces the loss of grains to the air. It also helps prevent nectar thieves from escaping without contributing to the plant's reproduction. The flower behaves almost like a miniature machine with moving parts that activate only under specific conditions. This combination of motion and structure creates a silent dance between the pollinator and the plant. Tree trunks can produce some tropical flowers. Trunk flowering is a tactic used by certain species in dense forests where sunlight hardly ever reaches the ground. Their blossoms appear along the bark of large branches and thick tree trunks, rather than reaching for bright canopy light. Because of this arrangement, flowers are placed right in the way of animals that climb or stroll alongside the trees. Trunk flowering is an effective way to attract attention in a crowded habitat because fruit bats, beetles, and small mammals frequently pass within centimeters of these unusual blooms. The blooms might be big, fragrant, or have thick skins to resist repeated contact. Additionally, their fruits frequently grow directly on the trunk, supported by the main wood's strength rather than slender branches. This technique shows how flowers can remarkably adapt to the architecture of their surroundings, turning the entire tree into a vertical garden that engages with wildlife on multiple levels. Some flowers form symbiotic partnerships with a single pollinator species. Certain plants only require a single kind of animal to finish their life cycle. In order to prevent other visitors from efficiently pollinating them, their flowers develop shapes, scents, and timing that precisely correspond with the behavior and body structure of that one partner. The match can be incredibly precise. For one insect's tongue or one bird's beak, a tube might be the ideal length. Anthers may be at the ideal height to only come into contact with one species. This limited collaboration guarantees extremely precise pollen transfer despite its apparent risk. Additionally, the animal gains from having a reliable food source that few rivals can obtain. The pollinator and the plant develop a mutually exclusive relationship over extended periods of time. Each depends on the other, creating a silent connection between two radically dissimilar life forms. Certain flowers are able to detect humidity and modify their fragrance accordingly. Certain flowers take advantage of the fact that moisture in the air carries scent more effectively than dry conditions. Their petals have specialized cells that can pick up on minute changes in humidity. The flower intensifies the release of its fragrance when the air gets moist and scent molecules can move farther. In order to save energy, it lowers the output in dry conditions. This change is not arbitrary. It frequently fits in with pollinators' daily routines, which require specific flying conditions. These plants increase their chances of being discovered without wasting resources by adjusting their scent to the weather. This straightforward yet potent sense reveals the intimate relationship between blossoms and their environment. They use moisture as a silent guide to determine when to release their chemical messages into the atmosphere. In addition to reacting to light and temperature, in order to attract inquisitive insects, some flowers imitate dew droplets. Certain flowers develop shiny, bead-like structures on their petals that resemble dew from the morning. These beads are enticing to tiny insects looking for water or shiny objects. When they land to explore, they either follow the petals' curved shapes deeper into the flower or brush against pollen. Because the beads catch light in the same manner as actual droplets, the mimicry is remarkably effective. They are frequently composed of thin layers of wax or smooth, reflective tissues, despite the fact that they are devoid of water. The plant attracts more visitors by mimicking dew than it might have otherwise. This tactic is particularly effective in arid environments where actual droplets are uncommon. By producing a visual illusion, the flower attracts the attention of creatures that use glinting cues to investigate their environment. Electric fields are used by certain flowers to attract bees. Bees are sensitive to minute variations in the electrical charge that may be present in the air surrounding a bloom. The charge surrounding a bee's body interacts with the flower's field as it gets closer. Certain flowers have internal and external structures that are shaped to create a unique electrical pattern. This pattern can show whether there is still a lot of nectar in the flower or if it has just been visited. Instantaneous detection of these signals enables bees to select the most profitable flowers without expending energy. The flower's electrical state is briefly altered when a bee lands, giving the subsequent visitor information. Beyond color or scent, a layer of communication is created by this silent exchange. It enables a plant to broadcast crucial information through fields that are invisible to other creatures. Some flowers produce natural sound amplifiers by forming their petals. Certain plants develop curved or bowl-shaped petals to amplify the sounds that pollinators make as they approach. These forms emphasize particular air frequencies by functioning as tiny echo chambers. Certain insects that fly close by cause vibrations that reverberate inside the blossom, making it simpler to identify the visitor. The plant's internal reactions, like producing more nectar or getting its reproductive organs ready for contact, are guided by this amplification. By reflecting sound in ways that are distinct from the background, the shape may also aid pollinators in navigating. Over time, the stresses of survival shape the entire structure into a natural tool. It adds sound to the list of subliminal cues that plants can utilize to their benefit, turning the flower into a listening and responding system sensitive to the acoustic environment. Reflective petals help some flowers stand out in low light. Some blossoms have transformed their petals into natural reflectors in deep forest floors, shaded woodland edges, and the gloomy hours of dawn and dusk. Each petal-less surface is composed of layers that scatter and bounce light back outward, rather than just absorbing it. Even weak rays that pass through leaves are caught by the tissue's tiny folds, ridges, and air-filled spaces, which work together like a field of mirrors. This may appear as a gentle glow to the naked eye. However, it appears as a bright signal against a dark background to insects with more sensitive vision. In flowers with pale or metallic colors, where reflected light is not obscured by thick pigment, the effect is particularly potent. When other species disappear into the shadows, the plant attracts attention because pollinators that are active in low light learn that these gleaming targets are worth visiting. Scarce light is transformed into a dependable calling card by reflective petals. In order to provide natural insulation, some mountain flowers develop hairy petals. The air in high alpine meadows can be soft, one minute and icy the next. In this unstable world, flowers that decide to bloom must shield their incredibly fragile tissues from harsh radiation and freezing winds. Some have found a solution to this issue by drawing fine hairs over their petals and outer floral parts, which trap a thin layer of still air. The heat produced by the sun and the plant's metabolism is slowed by this trapped layer, which functions as a tiny blanket. Additionally, the hairs protect pollen and delicate pigments from harm by dispersing the strong UV rays that shine through the clear mountain skies. Insects land on a surface that is marginally warmer than the surrounding air, which motivates them to remain inside the bloom longer and move around more. Hairy petals are more than just an oddity. These flowers are able to function in a climate that fluctuates between frost and brilliance because of their carefully developed insulation. Nectar from certain flowers contains intricate chemical messages. A lot of nectars contain more than just sweetness. Hidden at the base of some blossoms, within the transparent liquid, is a concoction of sugars, amino acids, ions, and specialized compounds that affect the bodies and minds of animals that visit. Some of these molecules improve memory, enabling a bee to recall the shape and scent of a specific flower, increasing the likelihood that it will return. Others modify the nectar's energy content or viscosity, influencing the pollinator's feeding rate and duration. As the blue ages in certain species, the mixture shifts. After enough pollen has been moved, nectar later soothes visitors, but early nectar may promote exploration and education. Nectar's chemistry can even be changed by the microbes that inhabit it, adding an additional layer of signals. Despite their unconscious interpretation of these signals, pollinators exhibit predictable behavioral changes. In order to direct partners towards movement patterns that best facilitate successful reproduction, the plant uses chemistry. Some flowers have seeds that can travel long distances on water. Some flowering plants use water as a highway for their progeny. Along riverbanks, lake shores, and coastal wetlands, their seeds have spongy tissues, trapped air pockets, or thick protective coats that don't soak, which are examples of buoyant structures that help them stay afloat. Seeds fall to the surface and start to float with the currents and waves as fruits ripen and split open. Some travel far downstream on the backs of gentle streams. Others go into tidal waters, where they are swept back and forth by rhythmic surges until they settle in a suitable area of sand or mud. The protective layers protect the embryo from salt, deterioration, and abrupt temperature changes while it is traveling. This method allows a single plant to spread descendants over wide areas, reaching new islands, riverbends, or distant shorelines without any help from animals or wind. Each flower becomes the starting point for a quiet voyage that may end many landscapes away. Some flowers can bloom under thick snow. A few resolute species are already getting ready to flower when winter only slightly relents. Their storage roots, also known as rheomes or underground bulbs, have been wading through months of cold with reserves of energy ready to be released beneath the snow. Growth starts as soon as the soil warms even a little. Sometimes, when the surface is still covered in layers of ice, UDIS push upward. As it rises, the developing shoot tip can produce enough heat through active metabolism to melt a small tunnel. The bud may still be encircled by chilly wind and white ground when it gets outside, but it opens anyhow. These early blooms benefit pollinators that have few other food sources and light that is not yet obscured by leaves. Thick and waxy, snow-resistant petals shield reproductive organs from freezing droplets. The goal of the entire strategy is to seize the first feasible days of the year. Some flowers create mild microclimates within their petals. The air feels very different from the outside when you enter the curved chamber of some blooms, if you were small enough to notice. Anyway, cup-shaped, funnel-shaped, or overlapping roof-shaped petals produce areas where humidity rises and wind slows. Incoming sunlight is absorbed and released as gentle warmth that the surrounding structure retains. The less drastic temperature changes in this protected area keep stigmas open and pollen grains hydrated. These microclimates offer insects a more tranquil and gentle place to rest than their A bee can stay inside and warm up more quickly on cold mornings. The slightly moister, cooler air can help relieve stress on hot, dry afternoons, because pollinators stay longer and pass through the reproductive organs more thoroughly. Plants that invest in this internal architecture frequently experience more reliable pollination. The flower turns into a small space with climate controls that are adjusted to suit its requirements. Certain flowers can only be found growing on slopes that face particular directions. Even over short distances, conditions on a north-facing slope can be very different from those on a south-facing slope in a hilly terrain. The angles at which sunlight strikes are varied, depending on exposure. Evaporation rates fluctuate, and soil stays either warmer or colder. Some flowering species develop such strong adaptations to these patterns that they can only be found on slopes facing a specific direction. Only when winter snow melts at the proper rate, or when spring sunshine strikes with a particular intensity, can their seeds sprout. The daily path of light across that slope creates the specific moisture regime that the roots expect, which is neither too dry nor too saturated. As a result, populations can trace invisible lines of water, light, and temperature by forming narrow bands along hillsides. The fact that the same flower disappears as soon as the hill turns may seem almost enigmatic to someone strolling through the landscape. In actuality, it is a sign of incredibly accurate environmental adjustment. Some flowers bloom when they don't want to compete with one another. Many species use the same general pollinators in thriving ecosystems. Certain plants adopt a more understated strategy by altering their flowering schedule rather than depending on more vivid hues or grander displays. Early in the season, late in the season, or during certain windows of that season when other blooms are few, they open buds. This timing makes it more likely that visitors will concentrate on their blossoms and lessens the noise of signals that pollinators have to sort through. This schedule is determined by internal controls that use indicators like rainfall patterns, day length, and accumulated warmth. A brief period of dominance may occur when conditions coincide with the plant's inherited timing rules, causing entire populations to bloom simultaneously. The flowers fade as other species do after pollination is finished. Several plants can share the same pollinators without direct conflict thanks to this staggered flowering, which gives each plant a turn in the spotlight. Nectar from certain flowers is concealed deep within tiny tubes. Some plants tuck nectar deep within long floral tubes, rather than scattering rewards on a broad surface. These hidden reserves are only accessible to animals equipped with the proper anatomical tools. Less specialized visitors cannot probe to the bottom, but long-tongued bees, hawkmoths with long feeding organs, or birds with thin beaks can. This architectural decision eliminates ineffective visitors who might take a small sip and depart without coming into contact with pollen. The ring of anthers and the receptive stigma placed around the tube entrance are always pressed against by the head or face of a suitable pollinator when it does reach in. The precise body parts that will come into contact with the subsequent flower of the same kind are dusted with pollen. The plant ensures dependable pollen transfer while safeguarding its precious resource from careless theft by combining concealed nectar with exact geometry. The entire pollination partnership is shaped by the tube's depth, which acts as a gatekeeper. Certain flowers change color depending on the chemistry of the soil. Some species' petal color is a sensitive reflection of the environment in which they grew rather than a fixed characteristic. Depending on the ratio of alkalinity to acidity in the surrounding soil solution that the plant is fed, the pigment molecules in the petals alter their structure. The internal environment of petal cells changes when roots absorb water rich in specific ions, causing the same pigment to appear as clear blue, deep violet, or soft pink. Sometimes, gardeners observe that a shrub of the same type wears different colors in different beds, or that colors gradually change as soil conditions change. This responsiveness can affect which pollinators are drawn to a given area, or how well blooms blend in or contrast with their surroundings in the wild. Additionally, it might enable the plant to adapt to minute variations in the availability of minerals. By converting invisible conditions into visible shades, each flower becomes a tiny living indicator of the chemistry that lies beneath it. In volcanic environments, certain flowers flourish. A few exceptional flowering plants establish themselves long before the majority of other life returns in areas sculpted by eruptions and recent lava flows. At first, volcanic ground is a rough mixture of broken rock, pumice, and ash that doesn't retain much water. In order to survive, these flowers embed their roots in the tiniest cracks, where minerals and moisture particles gather following infrequent downpours. As the ash decomposes, it releases slow-releasing nutrients, forming fertile pockets that these plants can access before rivals show up. They are able to complete a full reproductive cycle in conditions that fluctuate quickly between extreme heat and abrupt cold, because blossoms appear quickly during brief windows of favorable weather. By stabilizing loose volcanic debris, their roots gradually transform arid fields into habitable surfaces for future species. Following catastrophic events, these plants are among the first indications of life. Additionally, their existence shows that flowers manage to adapt, persevere, and reconstruct the ecosystem's foundations, even in recently created landscapes. Infrared heat signatures on some flowers draw pollinators. Some flowers use warmth instead of color to communicate. Insects that can detect temperature variations are drawn to the subtle patterns of heat produced by their petals or central structures. The visitor can navigate even in low light thanks to these warm zones, which direct pollinators towards nectar and pollen. Concentrated metabolic activity in tissues that function as tiny furnaces inside the bloom is the source of the heat. The flower boosts this output to produce a more potent thermal signal during periods of high pollinator activity. The warmth decreases when fewer guests are present. Many insects find it easier to recognize temperature-based cues than color changes, particularly in crowded or shadowed areas. Additionally, some pollinators use the thermal patterns to warm their flight muscles before re-entering the air. The flower makes it more likely that each visitor will stay long enough to spread pollen by providing both comfort and direction. This method demonstrates how blossoms can communicate with the living world through unseen means. Certain flowers have tiny mirrors within their petals. The few species' petals contain layers of tiny reflective structures that reroute incoming light. By reflecting light several times before it leaves the surface, these tiny mirrors increase brightness and produce shimmering effects that are particularly noticeable to insects with sensitive vision. The reflective layers can create faint, iridescent flashes that vary depending on the viewing angle, or they can enhance a single color by channeling it through membranes that intensify its intensity. Instead of being influenced by outside forces, these mirrors are created by carefully arranging transparent cells and airfill through natural growth. In addition to drawing pollinators, the reflections can shield sensitive internal tissues from too much sunlight. When multiple blossoms bloom simultaneously in a competitive environment, this optical adaptation offers advantages. Each petal serves as a shield and a signal, illustrating how flowers can modify light at microscopic levels to enhance survival and procreation. Some flowers have surfaces that resemble Velcro to keep pollinators in place. Certain flowers have developed surfaces that are covered in microscopic barbs or hooks that gently cling to the bodies of passing insects, in order to guarantee that pollen is collected or deposited in precisely the correct spot. These structures keep the visitor in place for a sufficient amount of time. The insect can move freely, thanks to the hook's flexibility, but they are also sufficiently firm to slow its movement and direct it towards particular structures within the bloom. The insect passes over anthers and stigmas, positioned to maximize contact as it moves across these textured surfaces. In addition to encouraging legitimate visitors to engage more fully with the flower, this slows down nectar thieves who might otherwise enter and exit without aiding in pollination. The pollinator can easily pull free once it has finished its job. These surfaces demonstrate how texture alone, without the use of force or traps, can influence behavior and establish a regulated exchange between an animal and a plant. Certain flowers can withstand fire and reappear once the ash has settled. Some flowers in fire-dependent ecosystems need flames to start their life cycles. Protected structures remain hidden underground, where heat cannot completely reach them, while the visible plant may burn to death. The landscape becomes bright and open after a fire, and the soil is enriched by nutrients released from the burned vegetation. These circumstances cause the buried tissues to come to life. With the help of reserves that were stored during the previous growing season, shoots quickly emerge. To ensure that germination takes place only after fire has cleared competing vegetation, many seeds in these species need to be exposed to the chemicals released by smoke in order to break dormancy. Pollinators seek out food in the newly exposed environment when the new flowers emerge, frequently in big clusters. This cycle is more than just a survival cycle. With the help of fire, which acts as a rejuvenating agent, these plants are able to seize control of the landscape at the ideal time. Some flowers control airflow to effectively disperse their fragrance. Blossoms with a strong fragrance component frequently direct air currents with ingenious structural designs. Scent molecules can travel farther with less effort when certain petals create channels that allow breezes to flow through the flower. Other forms produce whirlpools that carry scents into the air layers where insects fly. Scent distribution can be surprisingly precisely shaped by even small ridges or curves that affect how wind moves across the bloom. By lowering the quantity of fragrance required to reach pollinators, these airflow patterns aid in the plant's energy conservation. Clear odor trails that effectively direct pollinators to the source are advantageous. These subtle hair manipulations allow flowers to reach far more people than a mere scent release could. The blossom turns into a tiny architectural tool designed to interact with the atmosphere. Certain flowers have built-in sunscreens to keep their pollen safe. Bright sunlight supports growth, but can damage the sensitive grains that carry a plant's genetic material. To prevent this, certain flowers produce protective molecules that absorb harmful ultraviolet light before it reaches pollen. These compounds settle into the outer layers of petals and anthers, forming a shield that remains stable through long hours of exposure. Many of these protective pigments also affect color perception, adding to warm reds, rich purples, and deep blues. The flower may produce more of these molecules as the sun's rays get stronger, fortifying its defenses during the hottest part of the day. The plant makes sure that grains are viable when they are carried to the next bloom by protecting pollen from UV damage. This built-in defense system shows how flowers combine beauty with function, transforming vivid color into a line of protection for their most delicate structures. Certain flowers can grow on rocks with very little soil. Some thrive in areas with almost no soil, clinging to stone walls and sheer cliffs that are inhospitable to most plants. Their roots look for tiny pockets of dust and broken minerals that are stuck in cracks. As the roots spread out over time, they gradually establish a more firm base. These plants grow slowly and carefully manage their resources because nutrients are limited. To save water, they may have thick, waxy, or smaller leaves. Despite these difficulties, they yield flowers that draw pollinators that are moving along windy ridges or rock faces. Taking advantage of every rare opportunity, the flowers frequently bloom during brief periods when moisture is present. Their perseverance turns bare rock into a living environment when a plant is perfectly adapted to extremes. Like these cliff dwellers, it shows how little it really needs. Certain flowers conceal their aroma from potential predators. Some flowers must avoid attracting unwanted attention from animals that could harm them, while many rely on fragrance to draw pollen, only in certain directions or inside the confined areas created by their petals. Do these species emit fragrances? The scent is easily detected by a pollinator that enters the chamber, but it is barely perceptible to predators outside. Certain flowers change the chemistry of their fragrance so that notes of nectar are not detectable until a trusted guest is in close proximity. Some only release fragrance during brief periods of time when specific threats are not present. By using these techniques, the plant is able to communicate selectively, making sure that its signals are received by those who are helpful rather than those who are harmful. Scent turns into a carefully managed resource that strikes a balance between protection and attraction. To draw insects, some flowers use the temperature of their petals. Certain flowers produce temperatures that are higher than the ambient air, and warmth can be a potent invitation. Either the plant concentrates metabolic activity in particular tissues that emit mild heat, or its petals efficiently absorb sunlight. For insects that gain from having a higher body temperature, particularly in colder climates or in the early morning, this warmth serves as a beacon. When a pollinator lands on one of these blooms, it stays longer than it would in a cold climate, investigating the structure more thoroughly and interacting with pollen in more efficient ways. Additionally, the warm petals aid in the ascent of volatile scent molecules into the atmosphere, extending the flower's detectable range. These flowers have a higher chance of receiving repeat visits because they provide thermal comfort. Their temperature-based approach combines timing, attraction, and energy management into a single, nuanced but potent benefit. Some flowers have light-focusing lenses built right into them. Sunlight is shaped and redirected as soon as it touches the smooth curves of the petal tissues found in some flowers. These organic lenses focus light on the reproductive organs that are hidden in the bloom's center. In this way, when temperatures typically limit the effectiveness of pollen, the flower keeps it warmer and more active during chilly mornings or overcast days. By forming layers with slightly different densities, plant cells produce this effect, which causes light to gently bend as it passes through. Insects that are attracted to bright contrast may also notice the concentrated glow as a faint shimmer. This concentrated reflection becomes a useful signal rather than merely a decorative element, because some pollinators are highly dependent on variations in light intensity. Because of this phenomenon, the plant can draw tourists without using a lot of pigment, which saves energy. Additionally, it offers a benefit in areas with shade where light is weak and dispersed. The flower develops a tiny optical device through straightforward growth and meticulous cellular architecture, which fortifies nearly every aspect of its reproductive strategy. In caves, some flowers can grow in total darkness. A few rare flowering plants survive by forming peculiar alliances deep within some caves where daylight never reaches and photosynthesis is impossible. These species get their food from underground fungi that decompose organic matter that is brought into the cavern by dripping water or roving animals, rather than from sunlight, in return for a consistent supply of minerals and carbon compounds that the fungi extract from decomposing waste. The plants give up structural stability and a secure environment. The flowers look pale, ghostly, or even translucent without the use of green pigments. Their scents linger longer in the still air, guiding cave insects that use touch and smell to navigate, and their petals are frequently thick to withstand continuous humidity. Color is not important to these pollinators. Therefore, the plant prioritizes texture and fragrance over aesthetic appeal. Only when temperature and moisture levels achieve a delicate balance, which may not last for long, do certain blooms appear. These flowers demonstrate that the cycle of blooming is not halted by darkness. It establishes a world in which life adjusts through alliances and sensory tactics that are significantly different from those found outside the cave. In order to affect pollinator memory, certain flowers provide caffeinated nectar. A small number of flowers produce nectar that contains naturally occurring stimulants, such as trace amounts of caffeine made by special biochemical processes in the plant. This nectar contains a compound that helps some insects remember particular scents, petal shapes, and flight paths that lead to the bloom. The effect is powerful but subtle. Strong memories of a specific flower tend to make a pollinator return more frequently, giving the plant repeated visits that significantly improve the likelihood of successful pollen transfer. By promoting loyalty without offering more nectar than usual, the flower gains an advantage. The visitor is not harmed by the stimulant. Rather, it strengthens the insect's nervous system's learning centers, which distinguishes the bloom from other competing auctions. This establishes a pattern over time whereby pollinators grow dependable roots that repeatedly lead back to the same species. One of the most exquisite illustrations of how plants can shape relationships that seem almost deliberate through chemistry alone is the mechanism. A few aquatic flowers give beetles access to floating highways. The blossoms of certain water-dwelling plants gently rest on the surface of ponds, marshes, or slowly flowing streams. Beetles and other crawling insects can move across the water without sinking thanks to the platforms formed by their broad, robust petals. Visitors are led by these floating pathways to the center of the flower, where warmth, texture, and aroma entice exploration. Even heavier insects are unable to break the surface tension because of the way each petal's structure distributes weight over a wide area. While some species produce glossy patches that reflect light and help insects locate the bloom from a distance, others create subtle slopes that direct movement inward. As they crawl across these surfaces, beetles frequently get covered in pollen, and the chance of successful pollination is increased by their tendency to wander from one floating flower to another. When plants and insects work together, the water itself becomes a component of the plan. Every blossom serves as a bridge that sustains life above a liquid world, in addition to being a food source. Fungal networks are used by certain flowers to synchronize their blooming. In some grasslands and forests, symbiotic fungi have created extensive underground webs that are linked to flowering plants. Between roots, these fungal strands transport chemicals, nutrients, and minerals. One plant sends signals into the network when it detects a change in its surroundings, such as the presence of particular microbes or the arrival of favorable moisture. The same species' other plants pick up on these signals and modify their internal cycles to bloom in a coordinated wave. Pollinators are more likely to come into contact with numerous blossoms simultaneously as a result of this coordination, which improves overall reproductive success. By avoiding premature or ill-timed flowering, the network also aids in energy conservation for plants. Each plant supports the others, strengthening the system as a result of the reciprocal nutrient exchange between the fungal partners. The community decides on the blooming event based on information that is silently permeating the soil. This collaboration demonstrates how flowers take part in a subterranean communication network that is far more complex than anything visible from the surface. Birds and some flowers have symbiotic relationships. Certain flowers develop structures that are completely dependent on particular birds to pollinate them. Their tubes are the same length as the beak of the bird. Their nectar composition satisfies the high energy requirements of rapid flight, and their colors enhance avian vision. The bird gets a reliable food source that few rivals can obtain in exchange. The relationship gets so specific that the plant might only bloom when its avian partner returns to the area due to migratory patterns. Where pollen attaches during each visit is influenced by wing movement, feeding posture, and feather placement. The bird turns into a moving bridge that connects blossoms that are dispersed throughout the landscape. This specific tactic removes the inefficiency of drawing numerous pollinators for the plant. For the bird, it creates a reliable route that provides nourishment during long journeys. Through innumerable generations of mutual benefit, this relationship demonstrates how two radically different forms of life can influence one another. Sticky threads are used by certain flowers to collect pollen in the air. Some plant species use delicate sticky threads made inside their blossoms to capture pollen that is floating through the air, while many others rely on insects or the wind. These threads hang between structures that create narrow passageways or coat the inner surfaces of the petals to form a fine mesh. Stray pollen grains from the same species get trapped as air passes by the bloom. After being gathered, the grains are gradually transported towards the receptive stigma by capillary forces or soft petal movements. By using this technique, the plant can collect pollen even in places with a lack of pollinators or erratic breezes. Because they don't dry out and keep their tackiness throughout the blooming season, the threads continue to work well. This tactic combines the accuracy of guided capture with the unpredictability of wind. The flower creates its own net to collect what the air brings, rather than waiting for a direct visitor. Some flowers bloom for a single hour only. For a very short period of time, sometimes less than the duration of a single passing cloud, some species open their blossoms. Before abruptly releasing their petals, these flowers build up internal pressure and store energy for hours or days. The brief blooming season coincides with a specific time in their surroundings' daily rhythm. A single insect's activity, a particular shift in humidity, or a brief burst of sunlight that reaches a hidden spot could all be associated with it. The plant completes all necessary pollen and nectar exchanges during that hour, trusting that its selected partners will show up precisely on schedule. The blossom permanently closes after the moment has passed, shielding developing seeds from needless harm. This rigorous approach minimizes energy loss, exposure to predators, and inclement weather. There is only a fleeting glimpse of the flower in its entirety. However, that carefully selected interval is critical to the plant's entire future. Subtle magnetic fields are produced by certain flowers. Some species use the movement of charged particles inside their cells to create subtle magnetic signatures. These are very weak fields. However, some insects have sensory organs that can sense changes in magnetic intensity and direction. A pollinator locates the most fruitful area of the bloom by observing the change in the local magnetic pattern as it gets closer. This effect is not intentionally produced. It naturally results from the movement of nutrients through the tissues of the plant, metabolic activities, and ion configuration. Nevertheless, the blossom's structure can intensify or concentrate the magnetic field along specific paths, producing a steady signal. Additionally, the field might affect how pollen particles settle inside the flower or interact with incoming pollen grains. This technique adds another level of subtle communication between the pollinator and the plant, even though it is invisible to humans. It shows how even the smallest forces can have a significant impact on natural interactions. There are some flowers that bloom according to lunar cycles. Certain species time their flowering to correspond with the moon's phases. In addition to variations in daylight, their internal clocks also react to changes in nighttime brightness and gravitational pull. These plants start a series of biological processes that result in coordinated blooming across entire populations when the moon reaches a particular point in its cycle. During these times, pollinators that travel at night make better use of the increased light to move between blossoms. Additionally, the timing lessens competition with species that only use solar cues. In coastal areas, tidal patterns that affect temperature or moisture levels may coincide with the lunar rhythm. In settings where circumstances are ever-changing, these flowers provide predictability by tying their blooming to a cosmic cycle. The relationship between plant biology and the moon as steady motion illustrates how profoundly life's rhythms can permeate the natural world. Certain flowers produce nectar, but as the day goes on, their flavor changes. Nectar is not a fixed substance in some flowers, as the plant modifies sugars, amino acids, and aromatic compounds in response to temperature, humidity, and visitor activity. Its composition changes over the course of the day. The nectar may contain more simple sugars in the early morning, giving insects a quick energy boost as they shake off the cool dawn air. The nectar may become thicker or slightly more complex as the temperature rises towards midday, leaving a reward that clings to the mouthparts of seasoned pollinators that can maneuver through crowded environments. Even though the flower attracts late-arriving species like Siposkyder moths, it may produce nectar near evening with softer or more fragrant notes. Internal biochemical pathways that react to light and nutrient availability regulate these timed changes. By constantly editing the flavor and texture of nectar, the plant shapes the behavior of the creatures that visit it. The strategy ensures that each type of pollinator receives a reward tailored to its own patterns, while the flower gains consistent and efficient pollination across a full cycle of daylight. There are flowers that release warm fragrances only at sunset. In certain habitats, blossoms wait until daylight fades before releasing their most inviting scents. These plants start to produce volatile molecules that rise in soft waves as the sun sets and the air cools. These fragrances, subtle chemical reactions, which require less metabolic effort in the evening, give them their warmth. The end effect is a heady aroma that travels farther through the still twilight air than it would in the sweltering midday heat. The timing aligns with the foraging habits of nocturnal visitors such as moths and night-active beetles that depend more on scent than on sight. These pollinators follow fragrant trails that drift across wide open spaces as they travel great distances. By only releasing fragrance when their preferred partners are active, the flowers save energy by avoiding waste during the day when scent would quickly evaporate or attract unwanted attention. In the peaceful transition between day and night, this rhythm establishes a predictable meeting place for pollinators and plants. Tiny invertebrate communities can be found inside the blossoms of certain flowers. Insects, mites, and other tiny organisms form miniature ecosystems within the protected folds of some flowers. Because the humidity is constant, there are few predators, and food particles naturally accumulate. These invertebrates seek cover inside the petals. Pools of condensed moisture, traces of nectar, fallen pollen grains, and plant oils that sustain a whole community are examples of the In order to support the growth of these microscopic inhabitants, some flowers even produce a slight warmth or slightly higher humidity. Invertebrates can be advantageous to a plant because their movements can clean surfaces, stir pollen, or simply compete with harmful insects. These communities exhibit predictable trends over time. Some species come first, clearing the area by eating trash. Others come after, exploiting the protective chamber or consuming the residue. The flower develops into more than just a reproductive organ. It turns into a tiny home that sustains life well beyond its own requirements, showing how intricate relationships can form, even in transient environments. In full sun, some flowers strengthen their chemical defenses. During the hottest parts of the day, some blooms intensify their defensive chemistry. These plants release chemicals designed to repel herbivores or dangerous microorganisms when sunlight intensity increases, triggering the activation of enzymes. Since many of these substances are strong or bitter, they deter animals from eating petals or consuming nectar, which would otherwise aid in pollination. Additionally, protective pigments that absorb harmful wavelengths can be formed in response to heat and UV radiation. These pigments, which shield delicate structures beneath the petal surface, appear as deeper reds, purples, or blues. In order to conserve resources, the plant lowers its defensive output as evening draws near and the light becomes softer. The daily cycle of this increase and decrease in chemical strength is regulated by internal clocks that react to light intensity signals. The plant maintains its fertility and guarantees that pollinators come across healthy blossoms by fortifying its defenses at the precise moment when damage is most likely to occur. Some flowers never see light. They bloom underground. A few uncommon species bloom completely below the soil's surface, where light cannot reach them. These plants move through warm, moist soil, using their underground stems and roots. They associate with burrowing insects or small mammals that move through the soil rather than drawing in flying pollinators. Strong aromas from the flowers waft through cracks and tunnels, guiding guests solely by scent. They do not require vivid colors or photosynthetic tissues because their petals are shielded from the sun. They are made to resist pressure from the surrounding earth and are frequently thick, resilient, and pale. The movement of subterranean creatures or shifting roots may create a tiny chamber in which the flower opens. As visitors transport pollen from one hidden boom to another, pollination takes place silently in the dark. This tactic permits reproduction in settings with unpredictable or hostile surface conditions while shielding the plant from severe weather and predators. The petals of some flowers function as solar panels. Certain flowers develop petal surfaces that absorb and temporarily store light energy in areas with strong sunlight. These petals have unique pigments and internal structures that effectively absorb sunlight and transform some of it into heat or enhanced metabolic processes. Pollen matures more steadily, and visiting insects remain comfortable enough to stay longer thanks to the bloom's slight temperature increase. The plant has capacity to continue producing fragrance during colder temperatures, is also supported by the energy that has been captured. The effect is similar to how heat is accumulated by natural solar collectors. The petals direct absorbed radiation towards reproductive tissues that rely on stable environmental conditions, but they do not produce electricity. These flowers create a stable microenvironment that protects them from chilly winds and unexpected cloud cover by transforming sunlight into a controlled resource. The adaptation emphasizes how petals can be used as more than just decorative elements. They can also be used as functional organs. Certain flowers are totally dependent on pollen blizzards shaped by the wind. Some flowers don't even try to attract animals. The remaining amounts of lightweight pollen are released into the open, where wind currents transport them through forests, valleys, and fields. The pollen grains are designed to travel effectively. They frequently have internal structures that keep them in the air and smooth surfaces. Since they don't need to draw attention, these flowers typically don't have vivid hues or potent fragrances to guarantee that at least some grains reach receptive structures on distant plants. They instead make significant investments in producing massive amounts of pollen. Pollen can freely drift when dry conditions and consistent breezes are present at the time of release. The plants have developed wide margins for success due to the unpredictability of the process, releasing more pollen than they could ever utilize. The landscape is transformed into a silent cloud of drifting potential as the air serves as the medium of reproduction. Only in certain temperatures do some flowers grow symmetrically. Only when the surrounding air stays within a specific temperature range can certain species produce perfectly balanced blossoms. Petals may take on irregular shapes or not properly align around the center if the temperature is too high or too low. The rate of cell division and expansion determines the symmetry. Procedures that are very heat-sensitive. Growth is uniform on both sides of the flower within the optimal temperature range, giving many species their recognizable radial or star-like patterns. The flower adjusts by creating asymmetrical forms that may still function but look very different from the ideal structure when temperatures deviate from that range. The more symmetrical form, which pollinators frequently favor, encourages the plant to bloom during seasons when the environment is conducive to consistent growth. This relationship between temperature and form demonstrates the profound impact of climate on floral architecture. Certain flowers are able to sense the vibrations of approaching pollen. There are flowers that react to the soft shuddering of air caused by insect wings. Vibrations traveling through the plant structure are detected by their internal tissues and petals, which act as highly sensitive sensors. The flower initiates quick changes, like raising nectar concentration or shifting reproductive structures, when the proper movement pattern is recognized. These changes increase the bloom's rewards and readiness for the visitor's arrival. Plant cells are joined by flexible walls that effectively transmit mechanical signals, making detection possible. Different species are able to differentiate between beneficial pollinators and non-beneficial creatures by identifying distinct vibration signatures. By only providing their best rewards when the appropriate partners are close by, this sensory ability aids flowers in conserving resources. Additionally, it improves pollination accuracy by coordinating the release of pollen with the point of contact. Certain flowers have developed petals that resemble radar dishes. A few exceptional species develop petals that are curved to collect and reflect sound. These forms amplify the acoustic signals produced by flying insects, much like tiny listening bowls. The dish-shaped petal directs the sound towards sensitive tissues that detect the vibration when specific pollinators get close. The flower makes use of this information to decide when to expose fresh pollen, change its internal temperature, or release scent. By reflecting their own sounds back towards them, the curved surface also aids certain insects in finding the bloom. The plant and pollinator engage in a sensory conversation as a result of their reciprocal use of acoustics. The petal does more than just remain in the surroundings. It turns into an active surface that affects sound waves as they move through the atmosphere. These flowers show how nature can repeatedly find similar solutions, even in organisms that stay rooted in place, by molding themselves into effective acoustic tools. On their surfaces, certain flowers produce substances that resemble soap. Natural foaming compounds are produced by a small group of flowering plants on the surfaces of their leaves and petals. The plant breaks surface tension in water by combining specific fatty acids with specialized sugars to create these soap-like molecules. These substances are picked up by the liquid when rain or dew accumulates, creating tiny bubbles along the blossom's edges. These bubbles deter many insects that might chew on delicate petal tissue, since the slippery coating reduces their ability to grip and climb. The compounds also help the plant remove dust, pollen from other species, and fungal spores that settle in humid conditions. When breezes pass through the flower, the bubbles break and release molecules that can carry subtle scents or defensive signals into the air. Additionally, by keeping water from collecting in ways that could lead to rot. The soapy coating shields the petals from excessive moisture. This adaptation demonstrates how chemistry can be used to maintain a blossom's surface safe, clean, and prepared for the delicate task of reproduction, even if it appears fragile. Nectar pools, formed by some flowers, resemble miniature lakes. Some species produce nectar in large, open pools that fill wide floral chambers rather than in tiny drops. These pools can cover the whole blossom's width, creating shallow basins that appear to reflect the sky above as they shimmer in the light. Larger visitors like beetles, butterflies, or birds are drawn to the depth and volume of nectar because they can travel across the pool without causing harm to its fragile interior. The liquid serves as a habitat, as well as a reward. At stages, tiny organisms can occasionally grow and feed on organic traces and minerals that are dissolved in the nectar. Some flowers improve visibility by using their reflective surface. Pollinators are guided towards the center by intricate petal patterns that are illuminated by light bouncing off the nectar. Although the plant spends a lot of money creating this reservoir, it also attracts a diverse range of visitors that help spread pollen. Each flower becomes a tiny oasis where a variety of life forms congregate and interact thanks to these nectar pools. Some flowers have chemical armor to protect their seeds. Some plants use strong chemical barriers to protect their developing seeds. These substances build up in the tissues that envelop the seed, forming a barrier that deters insects, fungi, and herbivores from entering. The substances may have a bitter taste, cause slight irritation, or stop bacteria from growing. The concentration of these substances rises as the seed develops, eventually forming a shield-like protective tissue. When the seed is prepared for dispersal, its chemical armor changes composition, making it easier for the seed to decompose or digest once it is in the right conditions. The plant guarantees survival at 2 stages in this way. In the first place, it protects against threats while development is underway. By permitting the protective layer to degrade only in the proper circumstances, it subsequently promotes germination. By using this strategy, the species can safeguard its future without making significant investments in hard shells or thick walls. The seed uses chemistry as its last line of defense, and to ensure a safe emergence, insects can navigate labyrinths formed by certain flowers. Certain blossoms form intricate internal passageways that curve, rise, and twist to lead an insect along a predetermined path. The flower creates a chamber with tiny ridges, folds, or spiral passages rather than providing direct access to nectar. A pollinator must follow these routes as it enters, touching pollen-coated surfaces that are positioned at specific angles. The insect is prevented from moving too fast or from reaching the reward without finishing the path thanks to the maze. Nectar thieves, who lack the strength or agility to maneuver the structure, are also deterred by these guided tours. The goal is always the same, even though the labyrinth's complexity varies depending on the species. Each visitor's interaction with the plant's reproductive organs is controlled. These elaborate floral patterns demonstrate how structure by itself can produce a methodical procedure that turns a casual visit into a successful pollination event. Certain flowers provide overnight refuge to Chile. In colder regions, some flowers serve as a haven for insects that have trouble staying warm after sunset. Heat absorbed during the day is retained by the soft insulating chambers formed by their petals, because the temperature inside these areas is consistently higher than the outside air. Pollinators like tiny bees and beetles can withstand the chilly night. Adichunaji, the flower benefits. The insect frequently feeds on nectar as soon as it wakes up in the morning, rubbing against fresh pollen and transporting it to neighboring blooms. In order to protect their visitors from wind and frost, some flowers even partially close at night. The relationship between the pollinator and the plant is strengthened by this quiet hospitality, guaranteeing that both gain from the arrangement. The blossom serves as both a food source and a haven, offering security and comfort within its flimsy exterior walls. Certain flowers develop ladder-like petal structures. Certain species use tiny protrusions that resemble miniature ladders or stepped ridges to construct their petals, particularly in plants with deep floral chambers. These structures aid insects in climbing towards the nectar. Many pollinators would slip on smooth surfaces and miss the inner region, if they didn't have the ladder-like supports. Additionally, the ridges make sure that visiting insects align themselves precisely with the stigmas and pollen moves with remarkable accuracy as the insect moves up or down the petal steps. The bloom is accessible to multiple pollinator species due to its design, which can accommodate creatures with different body sizes and leg shapes. The plant gains from more successful visits and less potential damage from insects scraping their way upward. These textured petals demonstrate how a blossom can become an effective visitor-friendly space with just a small structural modification. Certain flowers release their fragrance at the height of pollinator activity. Many flowering species have rigorous schedules for releasing fragrance that are correlated with the actions of their preferred pollen. The production of scent molecules and the rate at which they evaporate into the surrounding air are regulated by internal biological clocks. The flower intensifies its scent just before the first light of the day. If a pollinator is active at dawn, the bloom conserves its energy until the sun is high if the pollinator emerges at midday. Chemical pathways that are precisely regulated in response to temperature and light cycles are necessary for these rhythms. Additionally, the timing avoids waste because continuously producing scent would deplete valuable resources. The plant makes sure that each scent plume reaches its target audience while avoiding attention from potentially harmful creatures by coordinating fragrance with pollinator routines. Scent becomes a precise communication tool based on the subtle movements of time itself, thanks to this optimized schedule. Some flowers tilt their blossoms in the direction of bees. Some flowers will slightly change their orientation in response to vibrations from bees in the vicinity. These flowers can stiffen or relax the petal base by adjusting the internal water pressure within specialized cells. The flower is in the most accessible position for a smooth landing thanks to this subtle adjustment. The likelihood that pollen-carrying bee parts will come into direct contact with the reproductive structures increases when the bee turns towards the visitor. Avicinaji, it lessens the possibility that the bee will bump into the petal edges and back away without getting inside. Once the flower recognizes the proper vibration signature, the movement occurs quickly. The same reaction is not elicited by other environmental sounds. An advanced form of sensitivity is highlighted by this selective turning, in which the blossom detects the presence of its primary pollinator even before direct contact takes place. Certain flowers are able to detect the arrival of nectar thieves. Some species are able to recognize when an animal tries to steal nectar without helping with pollination. These intruders might pierce the flower's side or enter the chamber without coming into contact with the structures that produce pollen. In response, the plant either produces less nectar or thickens the liquid to make it more difficult to steal. Around the opening, some blossoms close slightly, making the intruder have to put in more effort or give up. The mechanical sensors incorporated into the floral tissue are responsible for these reactions. The flower launches its defenses when pressure or movement patterns deviate from those of acceptable. The plant protects important resources for partners that support its reproductive success by deterring nectar theft. This awareness demonstrates how flowers can use basic yet powerful sensitivity to discriminate between beneficial and detrimental guests. Certain flowers can only be found growing on a single, hidden cliff or canyon. Some species are restricted to a single cliff face, canyon wall, or solitary rock shelf that satisfies their specific requirements, making their habitats incredibly limited. These sites might provide special circumstances like mineral-rich water soaking through limestone, a small window of consistent temperature, or wind patterns that shield fragile stems from harm. The flowers that grow in these hidden places frequently acquire characteristics that are not found in other areas. Because there is no appropriate foothold in the surrounding terrain, their roots anchor into fissures that were created generations ago, and their seeds only spread a short distance. Due to the difficulty of accessing their habitats, many of these species are long unknown to science. The stability of the tiny habitats these specialized flowers live in is crucial to their survival. Their presence shows how deeply plants can adapt to particular environments, creating fragile living communities that cling to the peaceful outskirts of the world. Some flowers remove pollen by using micro-vibration. To release their pollen, some flowers depend on precisely calibrated vibrations. The grains are kept in small chambers by their anthers, which do not open by themselves. Rather, they wait for a very specific vibration frequency that is generated by the movements of visiting insects, bodies, or wing beats. The vibration enters the structure of the flower when a pollinator lands and starts buzzing. The visitor is remarkably precisely coded by the controlled burst of pollen grains released by the tiny shaking. Vidointis pollen is kept from randomly being lost in the wind or rain and is guaranteed to land directly on the body parts that are most likely to come into contact with another bloom. Only specific insects can cause the release because different species react at different frequencies. By matching the flower's requirements with its partner's skills, the system functions as a living lock and key. By only producing the quantity of pollen that will be utilized, this method's accuracy enables the plant to save energy. One of the most delicate types of plant-animal communication is microvibration pollination, which is conducted solely by tiny movements and soft sounds. Some flowers create multi-chambered nectar. Inside some blossoms are nectaries divided into small, interconnected pockets that store different concentrations or types of liquid. Together, these chambers form a sophisticated structure that regulates a visitor's path through the bloom. A pollinator must pass through a series of chambers with slightly different tastes and textures when inserting its feeding organ. The insect is naturally positioned for maximum contact with pollen-producing surfaces thanks to this pathway. Additionally, by slowing down feeding, the design keeps visitors from rapidly depleting the nectar. The flower can ration its resources while still offering a gratifying reward because some chambers replenish more quickly than others. In order to guarantee that only the most efficient pollinators finish the trip, the architecture may even affect which species are able to enter the inner compartments. This multi-chamber system shows how internal spatial design shapes behavior in flowers. The bloom turns into a regulated space where the plant's ability to reproduce is supported at every stage. Vibrant metallic pigments that are only visible up close are used by certain flowers. Some species acquire pigments that result in glistening hues that change depending on the light's angle. These pigments produce effects that mimic polished mineral surfaces or metal. From a distance, these flowers may appear unremarkable to the human eye, but up close, the petals display complex optical patterns that immediately grab attention. These metallic flashes serve as powerful visual cues for pollinators approaching from the surrounding area. As the insect circles the blossom, the pigment switch are made up of layers of cells that selectively reflect. Light create tones that shift from gold to copper to blue. These glistening patterns could be a sign that nectar is available, or that the flower is fresh and pollination. Insects are encouraged to approach deeply rather than hovering uncertainly because the effect is only noticeable up close, by saving energy on long-distance displays. This adaptation enables the plant to save its most potent signaling tools for the last few seconds before contact, providing precise guidance to pollinators. Some flowers have microbial allies within their petals. Live microbial partners that carry out crucial functions for the plant can be found in the hidden tissues of some flowers. These microorganisms may stabilize the chemistry of nectar, eat dangerous pathogens, or emit delicate fragrances that draw pollen. While the plant benefits from services that increase its overall reproductive success, the microbes are given a protected, nutrient-rich habitat in order to support particular microbial communities that generate beneficial compounds. Some species modify the acidity of their nectar. Others produce microscopic pockets within their petals where these microbes can flourish without being carried away by rain or disturbed by tourists. These allies have the ability to change the nectar's flavor and consistency, giving it distinctive characteristics that some pollinators eventually come to favor. These collaborations show a complex layer of cooperation occurring within each bloom. The flower turns into a living habitat that harbors various organisms, forming covert partnerships that enhance their capacity for survival and procreation. Certain flowers bloom in hues that are invisible to humans. Some flowers exhibit colors that are invisible to the naked eye. Insects are obviously deceiving because these colors are found in ultraviolet regions. A bee may be guided towards nectar and pollen by the petal's vivid patterns, stripes, or halo. The same blossom may seem plain or pale to humans. The plant produces substances that are specifically made to reflect ultraviolet light, which results in the pigments that give these invisible colors their form. Through their ability to absorb harmful rays, these compounds also shield the flower from intense sunlight. Because ultraviolet patterns frequently disappear as a flower ages, They aid pollinators in differentiating between fresh and depleted blooms. Although it is not visible to us, this visual language is crucial to the everyday interactions between insects and flowers. When viewed through eyes designed to detect wavelengths that our own cannot, the world of color becomes much richer. Some flowers have nectar that glows dimly at night. In some areas, pollinators use scent and faint moonlight reflections to navigate at night. Some flowers contribute to this process by generating nectar that glows softly in a bioluminescent manner. The glow results from chemical reactions that break down the molecules in the nectar, releasing light. The soft lighting is frequently only discernible in extremely low light. However, it is bright enough to draw moths and other insects that are active at night. Visitors can follow narrow channels that lead deep into the bloom, or sit in shallow pools where the glowing nectar is located. Because it takes energy to produce bioluminescent compounds, the plant uses this luminous signal sparingly. The end effect is a display that only happens at night when pollinator activity is at its highest. Each bloom serves as a guiding light for the creatures that rely on it, and these glowing nectars turn the night into a peaceful, glistening world. Scent decoys that mimic insect pheromones are used by certain flowers. Some flowers emit chemical cues that mimic the pheromones that insects use to communicate with one another. These cues could smell like a fresh food source, a nesting location, or a partner. When an insect approaches expecting something familiar, it instead encounters the bloom. During the investigation, it brushes against pollen-producing structures and transfers grains to its body. The plant gains pollination without offering nectar or any other reward. The decoy does not last long because insects learn quickly to ignore false signals. Nonetheless, the tactic is successful when these species are blooming for brief periods of time. The scent molecules are created with amazing accuracy, matching complex blends that insects use to find partners, in addition to the general aroma. By using this technique, the plant can adapt a language that is already understood by another species to suit its own needs. Certain flowers use intricate negotiating strategies to share Several flowering species in a given ecosystem depend on the same Rather than engaging in mindless competition, they devise plans that enable them to share these visitors in a coordinated manner. It is possible for one plant to bloom early in the day, another at noon, and still another in the late afternoon. Pollinators may be able to move between them without becoming confused because of how starkly their colors contrast. Depending on how often the pollinator visits each type of bloom, some species modify the amount of nectar. Another species may produce more scent in an attempt to regain attention if the pollinator starts to favor one species over another. A dynamic balance is produced by these minor modifications. Pollinators receive a constant flow of resources, and no single plant completely dominates. There is no conscious decision made during this silent negotiation. Natural selection shapes characteristics that facilitate coexistence. Each species becomes more stable as a result of acknowledging the existence of other species in the resulting network of interactions. To spread their pollen farther, some flowers manipulate air currents. Some flowers have architecture that is intended to affect the flow of air around them. Pollen is lifted into rising currents by the channels their petals create, which guide breezes across the anther. In order to help pollen reach higher altitudes, where winds are more reliable and stronger, some petals have curved edges that direct air upward. The bloom itself transforms into a tiny aerodynamic structure that makes use of atmospheric motion. This tactic helps plants that live in open environments, where wind is a dependable partner, or that have fewer pollinators available. Additionally, the directed airflow prevents pollen from being lost to surfaces that could harm or trap it. These species extend the range of their pollen by influencing the wind instead of passively depending on it. Instead of being a random force, air is now a resource that is carefully managed. Wax coatings are produced by some flowers to withstand intense heat. Certain flowers form thick, waxy coatings on their petals when exposed to intense heat and sunlight, which can harm sensitive tissue. These coatings lessen water loss through evaporation and reflect some of the incoming sunlight. Heat cannot enter the flower too deeply because of the wax's ability to create a smooth barrier. By reflecting light away, certain coatings even have a slight reflective sheen that cools the bloom. This barrier prevents nectar from drying out and keeps pollen viable during the hottest parts of the day. Lower temperatures may cause the coating to slightly soften, enabling the petals to fully open when the weather is safe. Because of this adaptation, the plant can bloom where heat would otherwise destroy its reproductive organs. Wax-coated flowers demonstrate the resilience of a blossom when it is subjected to an environment that stresses all of its delicate parts. Certain flowers use mathematical precision to form spiral petal patterns. Petal growth in some species follows rigorous numerical relationships, resulting in spirals that resemble the patterns seen in galaxies, hurricanes, and shells. Growth zones in the middle of the bud are essential to these flowers. Each new petal emerges at a distinct angle from the one before it as it forms. Throughout the bloom, this angle is repeated, forming spirals that adhere to mathematical ratios that are frequently observed in biological systems. The spiral design lessons overlap that can obstruct vital tissues and helps the flower absorb sunlight uniformly across its surface. Additionally, the pattern affects how pollinators land and navigate the bloom. Their bodies come into predictable contact with the reproductive structures as they follow the petal's natural curves, increasing pollen transfer. The spiral pattern is more than just ornamental. It fulfills useful functions related to movement, light, and airflow. The flower becomes a living manifestation of the order that nature repeats on many scales by forming itself in accordance with these timeless patterns. Some flowers float upright, thanks to their inherent buoyancy. Some aquatic blossoms stay perfectly upright on the surface of still water because their tissues contain pockets of air that create natural buoyancy. These pockets develop inside specialized structures at the base of the bloom and between layers of petal cells. When the flower rises to the surface, the trapped air keeps it level and stable, even when gentle ripples move across the pond. The blossom's upright position makes it easier for visiting insects to see its colors and fragrances. It also keeps pollen dry and accessible. The buoyancy allows the flower to expand fully without being weighed down by moisture. If wind pushes the blossom sideways, the flexible stems and floating tissues guide it back into position. In order to maintain equilibrium during the blooming season, some species even modify the distribution of air within their tissues as they age. This ability transforms the water from a potential hazard into a supportive stage. Some flowers store heat from the previous day. In climates with rapidly cooling nights, some flowers retain heat during the day and retain it into the evening. Their petals contain dense tissues that absorb solar energy slowly. This stored warmth radiates gently throughout the night, keeping the inner chambers of the flower at a stable temperature. Pollen grains that would otherwise become ineffective in abrupt temperature drops are shielded by the heat. Additionally, it provides solace to insects that seek refuge within the bloom. The retained warmth in the morning promotes early activity in visiting which are attracted to the hospitable microclimate. Because of this adaptation, the plant starts its daily cycle earlier than other species in the area, giving it more time for pollination to be successful. Careful regulation of tissue density, cellular arrangement, and water content is necessary for heat storage. The outcome is a silent thermal reservoir created solely by growth and structure, which enables the bloom to flourish in spite of temperature swings. Some flowers conceal themselves from grazes by creating camouflage patterns. Not every flower aspires to be noticed. Some have to hide from grazing animals that could consume the flowers before they reach maturity. These plants grow patterns on their petals that resemble the leaves, rocks, or soil around them. The bloom is hard to see from a distance because of how well the colors blend into the surroundings. Certain flowers even produce patterns that mimic light specks or shadows that occur naturally on the forest floor. The flower quietly performs its reproductive functions, remaining undetected by grazers. Additionally, the plant's camouflage shears it from insects that eat petals instead of nectar. These flowers minimize unwelcome interactions and save the energy required to repair damage by blending in with the help of pigments arranged in delicate gradients and textures. The patterns emerge as the petals enlarge. The bloom masters invisibility, surviving by staying out of sight. In order to direct pollinators through a habitat, certain flowers bloom in succession. Several flowers of the same species open in a precise sequence in some landscapes. First to bloom are plants at one end of the habitat, then those further along a natural path, like the edge of a meadow, ridge, or stream. In pursuit of new nectar, pollinators travel through the area, following the unfolding wave of blossoms. By guiding the insects from one plant to the next, this blooming sequence makes sure that pollen spreads over great distances. Because each flower receives attention during a unique window of opportunity, the strategy reduces competition among individual flowers and increases genetic diversity. The plant's internal timing systems react to slight variations in temperature, soil moisture content, or sunlight exposure. Each person thus understands when to open in balance with the environment. Both plants and pollinators benefit from the coordinated journey that is the flowering wave. Some flowers develop petals that serve as nets. Certain species produce petals with delicate net-like structures made of interlaced fibers, stretching across voids or holes in the bloom. These fibers create surfaces that are both flexible enough to shift with the weight of the visitor and sturdy enough for insects to grasp. By providing surfaces that guide the pollinator's movement, the netting aids in directing it towards the nectar chamber. Larger animals must tread carefully over the openings, and smaller ones cannot slip through them. They come into contact with structures covered in pollen that are set up beneath the net as they move. The insect is precisely positioned where contact is most effective by the plant, thanks to this design. By fracturing droplets into smaller pieces that slide away rather than gathering in the blue, the net also aids in protecting the flower from rain. The result is a functional lattice built from living tissue that supports movement, protects delicate areas, and enhances pollination accuracy. Certain flowers alter the amount of nectar they produce based on how often they receive visitors. Some flowers track the frequency of pollinator visits and modify their nectar production accordingly. In order to save energy, the plant produces less nectar if visits are frequent. Even a modest reward will not deter pollinators who are already familiar with the bloom from returning. If it is in decline, the flower makes the nectar richer or larger in order to draw in more attention. Sensory systems that can pick up on physical contact or minute variations in pollen removal are necessary for this dynamic adjustment. Based on this information, the plant decides how much nectar to make over the next few hours. An effective system that strikes a balance between resource consumption and reproductive demands is the end result. During times of high visitation, the flower never wastes nectar, and when activity slows down, it never goes unnoticed. This adaptive technique demonstrates how keenly flowers observe their environment and how quickly they can react through internal chemical processes. Some flowers develop hollow petals that function similarly to resonating chambers. Certain flowers have internal cavities in their petals that trap and magnify sound. Small insects create faint echoes when they hover close by because the vibrations from their wing beats enter these hollow spaces. In areas with dense vegetation and poor visibility, the enhanced sound aids pollinators in finding the bloom. Adityonagi, the flower, can prepare pollen or modify the concentration of nectar when it senses the presence of a visitor thanks to the resonance. To create the ideal acoustic effect, these cavities need to keep a certain thickness and shape. During development, the petals naturally close around tiny air pockets, causing them to fall. For many insects that use sound to navigate, the echo created inside the hollow petal is evident, but it is inaudible to human ears. Through the enhancement of acoustic signals, the flower communicates in a sensory realm that is frequently disregarded. Scents from certain flowers can travel great distances on wind currents. Certain species produce scent molecules that are so ephemeral and light that they can travel long distances through open spaces. During the day, these fragrances ascend with warm air currents, and at night, they move along cooler ground layers. Pollinators follow the scent trail until they arrive at the bloom after spotting the aroma from a distance. The plant must invest in substances that evaporate quickly but hold steady over time in order to produce such long-range signals. As the scent travels through the atmosphere, it frequently changes slightly, producing a gradient that aids insects in determining their direction. These flowers make up for their lack of pollinators by dispersing their scent over long distances. The blossom turns into a wind-borne beacon. Only after many years of dormancy do some flowers emerge. Long periods of time pass before some species produce their first blossom. The plant stores energy in subterranean structures and gradually accumulates nutrients through modest growth during these years of dormancy. It waits for the right amount of moisture, warmth, and soil richness to support successful reproduction before it risks flowering. The plant focuses all of its stored resources on a single, powerful blooming event when the time comes. In a habitat that has been hidden for many seasons, the flowers may show up in large quantities. In response to this sudden abundance, pollinators act swiftly. The plants return to their peaceful underground life for many more years after the bloom fades. This method guarantees that every bloom has the best chance of drawing attention and lowers the chance of flowering under unfavorable circumstances. Some flowers develop underground tubers that provide nourishment for their blossoms. Large underground tubers produced by flowering plants serve as long-term stores of minerals, water, and stored energy. As the surface environment changes due to drought, heat, and erratic weather, these tubers stay hidden beneath the soil. The plant uses this subterranean storehouse to produce blossoms that appear nearly impossible under such severe circumstances when the time comes for them to bloom. The tuber supplies steady moisture even when rainfall is scarce. It also provides starches that fuel rapid growth of stems and petals. Because the tuber remains insulated underground, it endures extremes that the rest of the plant cannot. Some species use these reservoirs to produce spectacular blooms. After long periods of complete dormancy, the organism's hidden root structure provides all of the support for the flower that emerges above ground, which is frequently the smallest part of the organism. This method allows the plant to fluctuate between abundance and scarcity. Powered by years of stored sunlight and cautious patience underground, the bloom becomes a fleeting spectacle. Some flowers have aromas that hover near the ground and release mist. Many flowers produce fragrances that don't behave like other floral scents. These aromatic molecules adhere to cooler atmospheric pockets near the soil rather than ascending into the atmosphere. Instead of rising, the smell spreads like a thin mist that moves along the ground. Because the molecules are heavier and condense more easily in cooler air layers, this effect occurs. Many insects that live on the ground move through these layers by following scent trails that spread through low vegetation and leaf litter. It creates its scent to stay precisely where its favorite pollinators reside and travel. Similar to aroma, the mist can gather in tiny crevices where the air is motionless, creating scent pools that direct guests to the bloom. The plant expends much less energy to sustain the fragrance because it does not rise rapidly. This targeted distribution establishes a close-knit relationship between the flower and the animals that live in the peaceful environment close to the earth. Certain flowers create hidden spaces where seeds can safely develop. A protective chamber that protects maturing seeds is developed deep within the structure of some species' flowers. The developing offspring are protected from insects, herbivores, and inclement weather by this chamber. Over time, its walls may thicken or gather substances that deter pests. Because of the interior stability, early seed growth is supported by humid conditions. The chamber gradually opens or splits to release the seeds into the environment when they reach the proper stage. Certain plants form chambers that remain closed until they are activated by specific environmental cues, like warmth or rain. This guarantees that seeds are released into the world at the optimal time for survival. The formation of secret chambers turns the bloom into a fortress and a reproductive display. By employing structure and chemistry to safeguard the tiny life that awaits within, the flower serves as the first protector of the following generation. Surface tension is a pollination mechanism used by some flowers. Pollen is transferred by a few amazing flowers using the physics of surface tension. They create tiny liquid droplets that adhere to their anther tips. Pollen grains are carried by the droplet as it is drawn towards the insect's body by surface tension when a visiting insect touches it. A thin layer of the liquid covers the insect and swiftly evaporates, leaving the pollen firmly in place. Certain flowers arrange these droplets along tiny channels that intensify the effect, controlling each droplet's motion with unexpected accuracy. Because the droplets stay anchored until they are directly touched, the technique is effective even in light breezes. By using this method, the plant can distribute pollen without depending on powder that might float away. The flower makes sure that every interaction turns into a meaningful exchange by taking advantage of water-based physics. Biology and the tiniest forces of nature work together in a delicate partnership. Certain flowers give ant colonies complete might. Some plants produce blossoms that are home to entire ant communities that reside inside or near the blossoms. As the bloom grows, these ants find refuge in tiny holes or hollowed-out structures that naturally fall. In return, the ants protect the flower from damaging insects that could steal nectar or chew on petals without aiding in pollination. By eliminating pests and maintaining a clean surface, the ants patrol constantly. To increase the ants' loyalty, the flower occasionally releases tiny droplets of sweet liquid just for them. The ants may also inadvertently spread pollen from one bloom to another as they travel across the petals. Despite not being the main pollinators, their presence fosters a safe environment for legitimate visitors to feed. The partnership turns into a complex illustration of plant colony cooperation. A tiny world of activity is created around each bloom, with the ants providing security and the flower serving as a miniature home. Some flowers spin pollinators gently with their curled funnels. Some flowers create a spiraling path towards the nectar by forming their petals into curved funnels. A pollinator is guided through a gentle rotation by the funnel's smooth curves as it enters. The insect's slow rotation puts it in a position where surfaces covered in pollen rub up against particular body parts. The funnel narrows near the center, ensuring that the pollinator moves close to the reproductive structures before reaching the reward. The winding path discourages hasty getaways and promotes a more extended stay. The insect has no discomfort during the experience. Rather, it glides naturally along the spiral because of the way the petals curve to accommodate its movements. This design lowers the amount of nectar the plant must produce and increases the likelihood of successful pollination. It turns the bloom into a dynamic, flowing space where every interaction is governed by shape. Certain flowers have fragrances that drastically alter with temperature. Many species emit scents that change in composition based on the ambient air temperature. The aroma may be mild, delicate, or slightly sweet. At lower temperatures, the plant releases enzymes when the air gets warmer, changing some molecules into others with more potent or sophisticated odors. At longer distances, the aroma might become more intense, richer, or more perceptible. These modifications aid in the flower's coordination with the pollinator's activity patterns, while insects active in hotter weather follow stronger trails. Those that move during cooler hours receive subtle hints of the bloom. Additionally, when the fragrance would evaporate too quickly, the temperature-dependent scent stops. Excessive fragrance production. Every fragrance molecule has a purpose thanks to the flower's ability to synchronize aroma with the cycles of the day. The bloom uses a changing language that is solely influenced by heat to communicate. Certain flowers only bloom when the soil is disturbed by lightning. For certain species to emerge, the ground must be struck by lightning. When a bolt strikes the soil, it fractures compacted earth, changes minerals, and increases nitrogen availability. These modifications produce circumstances that some dormant seeds interpret as an invitation to start growing. It is possible that the seeds were concealed beneath earthen strata 4 years before this particular set of physical and chemical cues materialized. Following the storm, the ground is slightly rearranged and enriched, which makes it possible for young roots to grow into lightning-induced cracks. The seedlings benefit from the unexpected surge of nutrients as they develop. When the time for blooming comes, the flowers surround the storm-affected areas in clusters. This tactic guarantees that the plant will only bloom when the environment has been revitalized, both a destroyer and a catalyst. Lightning awakens life that had been dormant until the sky above it opened. After each pollinator visit, some flowers change the shape of their blooms. Every time a guest arrives, some blossoms discreetly change their shape. These modifications could entail shifting the stigmas, adjusting the nectar channel's curvature, or adjusting the petal's angle. The change occurs as a result of minor adjustments in pollen placement or mechanical pressure. The flower increases the effectiveness of subsequent visits by changing its shape. The plant may reveal a new section if pollen was removed unevenly. The flower may reposition itself to improve its chances of success if a specific area of the bloom was not touched. Throughout the day, these movements take place gradually but steadily. They are an example of responsive architecture in which the bloom changes moment by moment and gains knowledge from every interaction. The plant can adjust its reproductive strategy during a single flowering season thanks to its adaptable design. Some flowers develop bioluminescent companions that intensify their luminosity. Certain flowers develop a bond with luminous microorganisms that reside on or inside their petals. These microscopic companions use organic chemical reactions to create gentle light, These microorganisms give the flower a subtle aura when it blooms at night. In areas with limited moonlight, such as open meadows or dense forests, the glow might aid nocturnal pollinators in finding the bloom. The microorganisms acquire a stable surface that is nutrient-rich, and the plant gains from drawing in specialized visitors. When the plant releases tiny amounts of sugar or oils that sustain the microbes, the partnership frequently develops. The glow eventually becomes a recurring aspect of the bloom's nighttime appearance. The flower becomes a silent lantern due to this shared luminosity. The steady, soft light reveals a covert cooperation between two types of life that cooperate to survive. Certain flowers reinforce their structure with precise petal geometry. A number of flowering species rely on complex geometric patterns to reinforce their petals against stress. These blossoms develop delicate ridges, folds, or layered contours that disperse pressure throughout the entire petal rather than flat surfaces. The geometric framework absorbs the impact and keeps the bloom from tearing when the wind shakes it or when raindrops hit with unexpected force. Cells naturally divide and expand in specific directions to form the shapes. The flower has unexpected strength while still looking delicate because some of its petals have overlapping layers that resemble tiny architectural beams. Additionally, these geometric patterns affect the way sunlight strikes the petal, producing brightness that more effectively draws pollen. The flower can stay open for longer thanks to the shape's assistance in maintaining structural stability, which increases the likelihood of successful pollination. The blossom transforms into a sophisticated fusion of engineering and art, demonstrating how the same principles used by humans to create strong yet elegant designs are also developed in natural forms. Certain flowers use heat pulses to communicate with pollen. When a compatible pollinator gets close, some flowers pulse brief waves of warmth through their petals. The flower reacts by initiating metabolic processes that cause a rapid increase in temperature when it detects changes in vibration or airflow. Through touch or specialized sensory organs, an insect can sense the gentle waves of warmth radiating outward. The pulse indicates that pollen is ready for collection or that nectar is available. The accuracy of pollen transfer is increased when pollinators stay on blooms that provide these warm bursts for longer. Even in cool climates or areas with a lot of vegetation, where other signals might not be reliable, the flower uses heat instead of scent or color to communicate. In just a few seconds, the pulses stop, saving energy and sending out a targeted invitation. An effective and silent way for plants and insects to coordinate is through this thermal language. Nectar from certain flowers serves as an insect's natural remedy. Nectar produced by blossomins in some ecosystems contains substances that can help visiting insects stay healthy. These substances might boost immunity, lessen internal parasites, or increase resistance to infections. Beneficial molecules enter pollinator systems and have mildly healing effects when they consume this nectar. Depending on the season or the existence of specific dangers in their surroundings, certain plants modify the potency of these substances. These flowers improve the health and ability of the insects that visit them to carry out their pollination duties. These blooms eventually develop into significant havens for species that deal with ongoing biological difficulties. It also helps the plant. Healthy pollinators travel farther, visit more frequently, and carry more pollen. The nectar turns into more than just a prize. Long-term coevolution between plants and insects shapes it into a therapeutic resource. Some flowers cover their buds with fragrant curtains that provide protection. Before they bloom, some plants surround their closed buds with thick clouds of protective scent. The presence of developing petals is concealed by these scent curtains, which serve as barriers. Herbivores looking for food steer clear of the area because the scent indicates chemicals that are unpalatable or possibly dangerous. Insects that would puncture the buds and deplete their nutrients before the flower has a chance to open are also deterred by the scent curtain. The scent curtain gradually thins into more enticing scents that draw pollinators as the bug ages and its petals get ready to open. With amazing timing, the flower transitions from protection to communication. The blossom can emerge at the ideal time thanks to this carefully regulated change, which guarantees that the fragile tissues inside the bud reach maturity undisturbed. Some flowers cover entire landscapes in varying waves of bloom. Certain species use subtle environmental cues to coordinate their blooming over wide areas. Plants react in synchronized waves to changes in temperature, moisture, and sunlight. Fields, hillsides, or the understory of forests are covered in rolling patterns of color created by blossoms that first appear in one area of the landscape and then move to another. To ensure that pollen spreads over great distances, pollinators track these waves as they move. Because not all flowers open at the same time, the shifting bloom also keeps individual plants from becoming overly competitive. Every wave gives visiting insects a new supply of nectar while enabling earlier blooms to finish their reproductive cycle. These waves give the ecosystem a living rhythm, a silent dance between plant communities and their ever-changing. Certain flowers produce pollen grains that resemble crystals. Certain species produce pollen grains that resemble tiny crystals and take the shape of sharp geometric shapes. These grains, intricate ridge, facet, and spine patterns, aid in their ability to stick to pollen. The grains reflect light like tiny minerals. When magnified, pollen adheres securely to feathers, hairs, or scales while being transported thanks to each crystal-like structure. Different species have different designs, which could affect which pollinators engage with the bloom. In certain instances, the grains are guided into precise locations where fertilization takes place by the crystalline shapes that interlock with textured surfaces inside the flower. Despite being invisible to the human eye, these microscopic structures play a major role in the plant's ability to reproduce. In order to control movement and guarantee accuracy, the flower makes use of geometry on an extraordinarily small scale. Certain flowers make friendly alliances with lichens and mosses. Some flowers grow cooperatively with mosses and lichens in damp or shaded environments. The mosses help the plant stay hydrated during hot weather by retaining moisture and forming a humid microclimate around the base of the flower. By stabilizing soil or decomposing minerals that improve the environment, lichens help. In turn, the flower offers subtle advantages, like providing small amounts of organic material that fall from aging. Petals, or shading delicate moss tissue. These coalitions develop organically and don't need intentional cooperation. They are the result of species living in close quarters. Being able to coexist, the group eventually transforms into a small community where each organism helps the others. The moss and lichen have a protected, nutrient-rich environment, and the flower flourishes in situations that would otherwise be too dry or unstable. Some flowers develop tiny, star-like scales that reflect light. Certain flowers have tiny reflective structures on their petal surfaces that catch sunlight in dazzling bursts. Light is scattered in various directions by the patterns in which these scales are arranged. A scale creates tiny points of brightness that sparkle to insects nearby as the bloom moves in the breeze. These flashes serve as unmistakable indicators of a healthy, fresh flower. Visitors are directed straight to the nectar source by the scales, which make the bloom stand out among the dense vegetation. Despite the minuscule size of each scale, when they produce a shimmering display that travels across the petal like dispersed stars. By dispersing intense light, the reflective structures also aid in protecting sensitive tissue. The sparkle is made up of carefully placed layers of natural material that act as a shield and a beacon. Certain flowers create petal cavities to retain sunlight and provide warmth. In order to capture sunlight during the day, some species form concave or hollow regions inside their petals. These cavities act as natural warmers that hold heat within the bloom. The captured warmth helps accelerate chemical processes connected to pollen viability and nectar production. When a pollinator enters the flower, it encounters a pocket of air slightly warmer than the surrounding environment. Longer visits are encouraged by this comfort, which raises the possibility of pollen transfer. The cavities, which act as tiny greenhouses concealed within the bloom, also shield the internal structures from chilly breezes. The flower maintains a steady temperature for its reproductive organs by regulating the amount of light that enters and the areas where warmth builds up. The design shows how even minor changes to the shape of the petals can have significant benefits. Some flowers guide insects with slow-motion petal movements. Some species use their petals slow, nearly undetectable movements to direct pollen. These movements, which change the location of openings or pathways leading to nectar, take place over the course of minutes or hours. The flower may gently nudge the visitor towards pollen-bearing structures by slowly curving its petals inward when an insect lands. The petals may move once more after pollination to entice the insect to leave in a different direction, transferring pollen to a different bloom. The flower can change shape without using a lot of energy thanks to these movements, which are dependent on variations in the water pressure inside specialized cells. The pollinator is not startled or hindered by the slow adjustments. Rather, they produce a controlled environment that gradually increases pollen transfer accuracy. Every motion is silent and purposeful, demonstrating a degree of responsiveness that develops more slowly in plants than in animals. I appreciate you taking this peaceful trip into the secret realm of flowers. Blooms are often thought of as straightforward decorations. However, the closer we examine, the more complex systems, unexpected tactics, and tiny, time-shaped pockets of wonder we discover. A tale of survival that develops at a slower pace than our own is contained in each petal, fold, and scent. The world seems a little more alive and connected when we comprehend even a tiny portion of that hidden genius. Please like, subscribe, or leave a comment below if you liked this gentle exploration, one drowsy soul at a time. Your assistance enables others to make their way here, and the next video will be there to provide you with another peaceful space to think when you're feeling inquisitive again. Let your breathing slow for the moment. Allow the remainder of the day to pass as your shoulders relax. Good night.